Before I begin to tell this story that forever changed my life, I want to issue a warning. Not everything that appears as care is true love. Sometimes, poison comes disguised as medicine, served by the hands of those who should protect us. Hello, my dears. My name is Constance. I'm 89 years old now, but the story I'm about to tell begins when I was just 17. If you're just starting to watch now, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share with someone who needs to hear this story. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. Your company gives me strength to relive these painful memories that need to be told. It was 1953 in rural Georgia. Back then, things were very different. Arranged marriages were common, especially in traditional families like mine and Leonard's. I had barely turned 17 when my father announced he had found a good match for me. Leonard, 23 years old, the only son of Mrs. Eleanor, a respected widow in our small town. I remember as if it were yesterday the day I met Leonard. He was a handsome young man of few words, with deep brown eyes that seemed to carry a sadness I would only understand years later. My girlish heart was immediately enchanted. I dreamed of a life by his side. I dreamed of a house full of running children, of Sunday afternoons with family. Oh, how I dreamed. The wedding took place 3 months later. A simple ceremony in the town's main church, followed by a reception in my parents' backyard. I was nervous, of course, but also full of hope. How could I have imagined that I was walking into the beginning of a nightmare that would last 5 long years? After the wedding, I moved into Leonard's house, where he lived with his mother, Mrs. Eleanor. The house was large, old, with that characteristic smell of mildew and lavender that never left my memories. It had a garden in the back where Mrs. Eleanor cultivated her herbs that I innocently admired for their variety and for the knowledge my mother-in-law had about each one. "You'll be happy here, Connie dear." That was the first thing Mrs. Eleanor said to me when I crossed the threshold of that house as her son's new wife. Connie dear. The nickname she gave me sounded sweet at that moment, but today my stomach turns just remembering it. Mrs. Eleanor was 58 when I married her son. She was a woman of medium stature, gray hair always pulled back in a tight bun, knotted hands from a lifetime of work, and eyes, oh, those pale blue eyes, almost transparent, eyes that seemed to pierce through you as if they could read all your secrets. She always wore dark dresses with long sleeves, even in the most intense heat of a Georgia summer, and carried with her a rosary that she passed between her fingers constantly, while murmuring prayers that I could never completely understand. A widow for more than 15 years when I met her, Mrs. Eleanor had built her life around her only son. "My Leonard is all I have in this world," she would always repeat, with a look that mixed devotion and something more, something I only managed to identify years later: possession. In the first days after my arrival, Mrs. Eleanor appeared to be an attentive mother-in-law. She wouldn't let me do the heaviest housework. She said I needed to get used to things gradually. She spent hours teaching me family recipes, telling stories from Leonard's childhood, showing me how she liked things to be done in the house. "A good wife needs to learn how to please her husband, Connie dear," she would say as she showed me how Leonard liked his coffee strong with little sugar, or how she ironed his shirts, always with a damp cloth on top to avoid creases. I absorbed everything, eager to be a good wife, to please not only my husband, but also my mother-in-law, who seemed so willing to accept me into the family. How naive I was. The nights with Leonard were sweet, despite his initial shyness. He was gentle, affectionate, and gradually we built our intimacy. Mrs. Eleanor never mentioned the subject, but I noticed how restless she became when we retired to our bedroom, how her eyes followed me with an expression I couldn't decipher. 3 months after the wedding, I discovered I was pregnant. Joy filled my heart. A child, the fruit of our love, was growing inside me. When I told Leonard, I saw his eyes fill with tears of happiness. He hugged me tightly, whispering promises of a wonderful life for our growing family. When we told Mrs. Eleanor, her reaction was strange. For just an instant, just a brief moment, I saw something pass through her pale eyes. Was it fear? Anger? But it was so quick that I thought I had imagined it, because soon she was embracing me, saying how wonderful it would be to have a grandchild to brighten the house. Now, more than ever, you need to take care of yourself, Connie dear, she said, holding my hands in hers. I'll prepare special teas to strengthen your womb. In my family, we've always had trouble carrying babies to term. It was that day that the ritual began. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, precisely, Mrs. Eleanor would call me to the living room. She would sit me in the most comfortable armchair, place a cushion at my back, and bring a tray with a single blue porcelain cup with delicate gold flowers. "This is a special herbal tea, Connie dear," she would explain as she served the dark, steaming liquid. "A family recipe passed down from generation to generation. It will strengthen your womb to carry my grandchild." The tea had a bitter taste, almost undrinkable. The first few times I made a face when tasting it. "I know it's not tasty," she said with an understanding smile. "But good medicine doesn't taste good, does it? Drink it all, Connie dear. It's for the baby's sake." And I drank it, drank all of that bitter liquid while she watched me, never taking her eyes off me, until the last drop disappeared. Sometimes I felt slight discomfort afterward, nausea, headaches, mild cramps. But Mrs. Eleanor assured me it was normal, that it was the medicine taking effect. My mother also had difficulties having me, she would tell as she collected the empty cup. She lost 3 babies before me, but she also drank these teas, and look, she managed to bring me into the world. The weeks went by, and I continued taking the tea daily. The discomfort increased, but I endured, thinking of the baby, of the family we were building. Until one afternoon, after drinking the tea, I felt a sharp pain, different from anything I had ever felt before, and then the blood. I remember screaming for help, Mrs. Eleanor running to assist me, Leonard arriving home from work and finding me already in bed, pale and weak. The town doctor was called urgently, but it was too late. I had lost the baby. The pain of the loss was devastating. I cried for days, inconsolable. Leonard suffered in silence, red eyes, trembling hands when he tried to comfort me. And Mrs. Eleanor, she was always there taking care of me, bringing more teas now to cleanse the womb, repeating that it wasn't my fault, that it was just fate. "Some women have weak wombs, Connie dear," she would say, running her hand through my hair as I cried. "But don't worry, we'll try again, and this time I'll take even better care of you." After a few weeks, when the physical pain had passed, but the emotional pain was still very much alive, Leonard and I grew close again. The desire to have a child, to fill the void left by the loss, united us even more, and it wasn't long before I became pregnant again. The initial joy was restrained this time, tempered by the fear of loss. Mrs. Eleanor immediately restarted the tea ritual, now with even greater urgency. "This time it will work, Connie dear," she guaranteed, as she served me the liquid in the same blue cup with gold flowers. "You'll see, this baby will make it." But it didn't. Neither this one, nor the next, nor the one after that. 5 times my womb sheltered a life, and 5 times I lost it, always around the 3rd month, always after weeks of drinking Mrs. Eleanor's tea. With each loss, a part of me died too. Leonard began to drink heavily, spending entire nights away from home, returning staggering and smelling of whiskey. "I'm cursed," he would say, between drunken sobs. "God doesn't want me to be a father." And as our marriage disintegrated under the weight of consecutive losses, Mrs. Eleanor was always there, always attentive, always with her tea ready at 3 in the afternoon. "Don't worry about Leonard," she would tell me. "Men don't understand a woman's pain, but he has me. He will always have me." The entire town was already talking about my supposed inability to bear children. Women whispered when I passed by. Looks of pity followed me wherever I went. "Poor Constance," they would say. 5 losses. She must be a cursed woman. I felt exactly like that. Cursed. Until after the fifth miscarriage, Mrs. Sarah, the midwife who had attended to me in all the previous losses, asked to examine the tea that Mrs. Eleanor gave me. That's when the truth came out. Mrs. Sarah immediately recognized the smell. Rue mixed with guinea henweed, two powerful herbs known for their abortifacient properties. The tea that my mother-in-law served me daily with such care and insistence wasn't to strengthen my womb, but to ensure that no baby survived in it. At that moment, everything made sense. The words whispered in Leonard's ear when she thought I wasn't listening. Perhaps it's better this way, my son. You will always have me. We will always have each other. The excessive care, the insistence that I drink to the last drop of the tea, the looks that followed my growing belly with something that wasn't joy, but anxiety. Mrs. Eleanor didn't want grandchildren. She wanted her son all to herself, tied to her by bonds that no other woman could break, and for that she was willing to kill her own grandchildren before they could even be born. The revelation fell on me like lightning, splitting my world in two. 5 babies, 5 lives that I carried in my womb, that I loved from the first moment, that I dreamed of cradling in my arms. 5 children who were stolen from me by the woman who should have been their grandmother. The hatred I felt at that moment was so intense that I thought it would consume me from within. But with it also came determination. I would no longer be a victim of Mrs. Eleanor. I would save my marriage, my chance to be a mother, my own life. And so began the plan that would forever change the course of my story. After Mrs. Sarah revealed the truth about the tea, a strange calm came over me. It wasn't the calm of acceptance, but the stillness that precedes the storm. I needed to be cunning. Any false move and Mrs. Eleanor would realize that I had discovered her secret. "Be careful, my child," whispered Mrs. Sarah before leaving. "People capable of doing what she did have no limits to protect their secrets." That night I couldn't sleep. Lying beside Leonard, who snored drunkenly after another night at Mr. Jerome's store, I relived each moment of the past 5 years in a new light. Every gesture of Mrs. Eleanor, every seemingly affectionate word, now revealed its true meaning. It wasn't love she felt for me, not even the cold tolerance that many mothers-in-law devote to daughters-in-law. It was something darker, more calculated. I was merely a vessel to perpetuate her lineage, but at the same time a threat to the control she exercised over her son. Through the bedroom window, I saw the full moon bathe Mrs. Eleanor's herb garden with its silver light. How many women before me, in how many generations, had been victims of this kind of evil disguised as care? The thought tormented me. The next morning, I began my own performance. I continued acting normally, without giving any indication that I knew the truth. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, precisely, I sat in the usual armchair and received from Mrs. Eleanor the blue cup with gold flowers, filled to the brim with that murderous liquid. "You seem better today, Connie dear," she commented, her blue eyes fixed on mine, looking for any sign of rebellion. "I'm feeling stronger," I replied, forcing a smile as I brought the cup to my lips. The familiar bitter taste flooded my mouth, but this time I knew what I was really drinking. The death of my dreams, the poison that had stolen 5 innocent lives. It took all my strength not to spit the liquid in Mrs. Eleanor's wrinkled face, not to scream all the accusations that were boiling inside me. Instead, I turned my face to the open window as if contemplating the garden, and discreetly let the tea run from my lips, falling into the plant pot beside the armchair. I repeated the gesture several times, pretending to take small sips until the cup was empty. "Very good, Connie dear," Mrs. Eleanor smiled, satisfied, collecting the cup. "This will strengthen your womb like never before." "I'm sure it will, Mrs. Eleanor," I replied. And for the first time since I had met her, I held her gaze without lowering mine. For an entire week, I continued my charade. Each afternoon, I pretended to drink the tea while discreetly pouring it out the window or into the plants. At night, when everyone was asleep, I searched the house for evidence, for some clue I could use to convince Leonard of the monstrosity his mother had been committing. It was on one of these nights that I found, hidden in the back of a drawer in her room, an old book of herbs. The pages were yellowed by time, the edges worn from handling. Leafing through it by the faint light of a candle, I found several passages underlined about the properties of rue and guinea hen weed. A note in the margin, in Mrs. Eleanor's unmistakable handwriting, froze my blood. 3 spoonfuls of rue, 1 of guinea hen weed. Boil for 20 minutes, serve hot, and made fresh in 2 to 3 weeks. She had calculated everything. Each miscarriage, each loss, each tear I shed had been meticulously planned. The anger I felt was so intense that I had to bite my own fist not to scream. In the same drawer, I found something even more disturbing, a small wooden box containing 5 baby hair ribbons, each tied with a piece of dried umbilical cord. With horror, I realized that they were mementos of the children Mrs. Eleanor never allowed to be born. My children, the grandchildren she murdered before they could even see the light of day. That night, I cried silently until dawn, hugging my empty belly, whispering apologies to my babies whom I never had the chance to cradle. The following week, I made an even more shocking discovery. I had to go to Mr. Anthony's store to buy salt. And while waiting to be served, I heard 2 women talking in low voices in the corner of the store. "Poor Constance," said one of them. "Mrs. Eleanor told me her womb is too weak to be a mother. 5 losses already. The poor thing must be cursed." "I heard," replied the other, "that she doesn't even take proper care of the house. If it weren't for Mrs. Eleanor, that Leonard would be living in filth. But what can you expect from a girl who can't even give her husband a child?" I stood paralyzed, the blood draining from my face. It wasn't enough to poison me, to steal my children. Mrs. Eleanor was also destroying my reputation in town, spreading lies, building the image of a useless daughter-in-law, incapable of even the most basic function expected of a wife in those days, bearing children. I returned to the house in a daze, each step weighing like lead. Upon entering, I heard voices coming from Leonard's bedroom. He had returned earlier from work, something rare in recent times. I silently approached the half-open door, and what I heard broke my already battered heart. "She won't be able to give you children, my son." Mrs. Eleanor's voice was soft, persuasive. "It's been 5 losses. Maybe it's a sign. Maybe you shouldn't have children." "But Mother," Leonard's voice was choked by alcohol and sadness. "I've always wanted to be a father. Since I was little, I dreamed of teaching a son to fish, to ride a horse." "I know, my darling, I know," she replied. And I could imagine her knotted hands caressing his hair as she had done since he was a boy. "But you will always have me. We will always be the 2 of us, as it has always been. I will never abandon you like all these other women do to their husbands when they grow old." I backed away in horror, the pieces of the puzzle finally fitting together. It wasn't just about preventing the birth of my children. It was about keeping Leonard forever tied to her, dependent like a child, without a family of his own to share his love and attention. That night, I made my decision. I could no longer stay in that house. I couldn't risk another pregnancy under the poisonous care of Mrs. Eleanor. I needed to escape. I had been pretending to drink the tea for almost 2 months now, and my body, free from the poison, was beginning to show signs. My breasts were swollen, sensitive. Morning sickness afflicted me, though I carefully hid it. I wasn't certain yet, but I suspected I was pregnant again, and this time I was determined to protect this life at any cost. The plan was taking shape in my head. I would write to my parents in Savannah. I would ask for shelter. I would gather what little money I had saved from the change Leonard gave me for household shopping. I would wait for an opportunity to speak with my husband, away from Mrs. Eleanor's ever-attentive ears. The opportunity arose on a Sunday, when we went to Mass. On the way back, Mrs. Eleanor stopped to talk with Mrs. Judith, an old friend. I pulled Leonard to a corner of the square. "We need to talk," I said, holding his hands in mine. "Not here, not now. Tomorrow meet me at the vacant lot behind the blacksmith's house at noon." He looked at me confused, his eyes still red from the previous night's drinking. "What is it, Constance? Why all the mystery?" "It's important," I insisted. "Please, Leonard, for the love you once felt for me." He nodded, still confused, and soon Mrs. Eleanor caught up with us, her blue eyes flashing with suspicion. The next day, at noon, I met Leonard at the arranged place. He seemed nervous, impatient. "What's so important, Constance?" I had to invent an excuse to leave work. I took a deep breath and told him everything. The tea, the abortifacient herbs, the discoveries I had made, the conversations I had overheard. As I spoke, I saw his face pass from disbelief to horror, and finally, to the purest fury I have ever witnessed. "No." He shook his head, backing away, as if my words were physical blows. "It can't be true. My mother would never—" "She loves us." "She loves you, Leonard," I corrected, tears streaming down my face. "But it's a sick, possessive love, a love that doesn't accept sharing. She killed our children to keep you tied to her." "Prove it," he demanded, his voice trembling. "Prove what you're saying." I took from my dress pocket a piece of paper where I had copied the recipe found in Mrs. Eleanor's book. I showed it to him, explained what each herb did, repeated what Mrs. Sarah had told me. "If you don't believe me," I challenged, "ask any midwife in the region what happens when a woman drinks rue tea with guinea hen weed every day." I saw the realization sink into his eyes like stones in a lake. I saw the exact moment when he understood that the woman who had given him life had taken the lives of his own children. His strong body collapsed to his knees, an animal cry escaping his throat. "5," he muttered, his hands pulling at his own hair. "5 children, my children." I knelt beside him, hugging him as his body shook with violent sobs. For hours, we stayed there crying together over the loss of our dreams, of our babies, of the innocence we would never recover. When he finally calmed down, Leonard raised his face, and I saw something new in his eyes. Determination. "What do we do now?" he asked. I took courage and placed his hand on my belly. "I believe I'm expecting a child again," I whispered. "I stopped taking the tea almost 2 months ago. We need to protect this child, Leonard. We need to leave." The decision was made right there. Leonard would go to New York first, find a job and housing. I would stay with my parents in Savannah until he established himself. Then we would reunite to begin a new life away from the poisonous clutches of Mrs. Eleanor. "She will try to stop you," I warned. "She'll use all the tricks, all the manipulations she knows." "It doesn't matter," he replied, a new firmness in his voice. "I will never look at her face again without seeing the murder of my children. I will never call that woman mother again." 3 days later, I left for Savannah. Leonard invented an excuse for Mrs. Eleanor, saying I was going to visit a sick cousin, and he accompanied me to the station. Our last embrace before departure was desperate, full of promises and fears. "Take care of our child," he whispered against my hair. "This time, nothing will take him from us." On the train, looking out the window, the Georgia landscape passing quickly by, I felt a mixture of relief and terror. I was escaping, yes, but I was also walking towards an uncertain future. All I knew was that I would never allow anyone, mother-in-law, husband, or anyone else, to decide about my life and the lives of my children again. When I arrived at my parents' house, I fell into my mother's arms and broke down. I told everything, every sordid detail, every moment of pain and betrayal. My father, a man of few words but a big heart, swore that Mrs. Eleanor would pay for what she had done. It took all the persuasion of my mother and me to convince him not to take the first train to confront her. "Justice will come in another form," my mother assured, always wise. "She will be left alone, without a son, without grandchildren, with nothing but her own poison to drink." In the safety of my parents' home, away from Mrs. Eleanor's watchful eye, my pregnancy flourished. My body, free from the poison that had intoxicated it for so long, blossomed. My belly grew round and firm. I felt the baby's movements, each kick, each turn, a confirmation that this time everything would be different. I received letters from Leonard regularly. He had found employment in a factory in New York, rented a small room in the back of a boarding house. He worked hard, saved every penny so we could have our own home when I joined him. And Mrs. Eleanor? According to Leonard's letters, she had gone mad when she realized we wouldn't return. She spread around town that I had run away with another man, that I had abandoned her son, that I was a woman without morals. But no one believed her anymore. The lies had become so extravagant, so full of hatred, that even her oldest allies began to question her sanity. In the 7th month of pregnancy, I received the news I had been waiting for. Leonard had managed to rent a small house on the outskirts of New York. It was time for me to join him, to finally start our family. But before I could leave, fate intervened once more. On a rainy night in July 1958, I felt the first contractions. Labor started earlier than we expected. For 16 hours, I fought to bring my daughter into the world. Each contraction, each moment of pain, was received with gratitude. It was the pain of life, not death, of creation, not destruction. And when I finally heard the strong, healthy cry of Rose, my firstborn, I knew that the cycle of suffering had been broken. Rose was born weighing 5.5 pounds, a small but strong girl with her father's brown eyes and, as we would discover later, my stubbornness. When I held her in my arms for the first time, I made a silent promise. She would never know the kind of evil I had faced. She would grow up surrounded only by genuine love, the kind of love that liberates, not imprisons. A month later, when Rose was strong enough to travel, we left for New York for a new life, for freedom. The train that took us to New York seemed to transport not only my tired body and my little Rose, but also all the hopes that I had buried during those 5 years of nightmare. Each mile that took us away from Georgia was a sigh of relief, a silent promise that the worst was behind us. Rose slept almost the entire journey, rocked by the rhythmic movement of the tracks. So small, so perfect, so oblivious to the world of pain that her arrival had healed. Looking at her serene little face, I could hardly believe that I finally had in my arms a living child, breathing, with her heart beating strongly against mine when I held her close to my chest. We arrived at Grand Central Station on a late August afternoon in 1958. The New York that welcomed me that day was a whirlwind of sounds, smells, and movements that had nothing to do with the quiet town I came from. People running in all directions, cars honking, the smell of smoke and hot asphalt. Everything seemed too big, too fast, too scary. In the middle of all that confusion, I spotted Leonard. He looked different, thinner, with deep circles under his eyes, but there was a gleam in his eyes that I hadn't seen since our first days of marriage. When he saw me with Rose in my arms, he ran in our direction, ignoring the curious glances of passers-by. "My daughter," he whispered, touching Rose's little face with trembling fingers. She opened her eyes at that exact moment, as if she knew she was facing her father for the first time. My daughter survived. I saw tears stream down Leonard's face as he embraced us right there on the busy station platform. In that embrace, I felt all the weight of the past years dissolve. We were a family now, a true family, united not by chains of manipulation and fear, but by bonds of genuine love. Our first house in New York was modest, 2 small rooms in the back of a row house in Queens, a working-class neighborhood where many Italian immigrants lived. The floor was cement, the walls urgently needed painting, and the only window faced a gray wall. But to me, that small space free from Mrs. Eleanor's suffocating presence was a palace. "It's not much," Leonard apologized as he showed me our new home, "but it's all ours, and as soon as I save more money, we'll find a better place." "It's perfect," I replied, and I spoke sincerely. Any place where we could raise our daughter in peace would be perfect. The first months were difficult. Leonard worked long hours at the factory, often doing overtime to increase our tight budget. I took care of Rose and tried to transform those 2 rooms into a welcoming home, buying cheap fabrics to make curtains, planting basil and rosemary in old cans in the small yard. Life in the big city was very different from what I knew. Everything cost more. People always seemed in a hurry. Neighbors barely greeted each other. In the early days, loneliness was my most constant companion, broken only by Rose's crying or laughter. But gradually, like a plant that finally finds sun after a long time in the shade, I began to flourish in that new environment. I made friends with Mrs. Carmela, an Italian woman who lived in the house in front and who was enchanted by Rose. It was she who taught me to make homemade pasta, who looked after my daughter when I needed to go to the market, who introduced me to other women in the neighborhood. "You are strong, Constance," Mrs. Carmela would tell me with her heavy accent. "Young, but strong like an oak. Your bambina is lucky to have a mama like you." Those words, coming from a woman who had raised 6 children practically alone after becoming a widow while still young, meant a lot to me. Perhaps for the first time in my life, I began to see myself as I really was. Not the inadequate and cursed daughter-in-law that Mrs. Eleanor had tried to make of me, but a strong, capable woman, worthy of respect and admiration. Leonard was also changing. Away from his mother's manipulative influence, he was rediscovering his own identity. He stopped drinking, became more communicative, more present. On Sundays, our only day together, he made a point of taking Rose to the park, proudly showing off the daughter he almost didn't have to anyone who stopped to admire her. "She has your eyes," people would say, and Leonard would swell with pride. "And her father's nose," I would add, laughing at his satisfied expression. When Rose turned 1, we organized a small party in Mrs. Carmela's backyard. We didn't have much money, but with the help of the neighbors, we prepared sweets, a simple cake, and decorated the space with colorful paper flowers. It was a simple celebration, but filled with genuine joy. The joy of celebrating not only the first year of our daughter's life, but also our own survival, our liberation. During the party, as I watched Leonard spin Rose in the air, making her laugh, Mrs. Carmela approached me. "I've never seen a father so in love with his daughter," she commented, "and I've never seen a child so loved." "She is our miracle," I replied, without going into detail about the previous losses. That pain was still too deep to be shared. Mrs. Carmela squeezed my hand with understanding. Sometimes we need to lose a lot to appreciate what we finally have. How much wisdom there was in those simple words. In 1960, I discovered I was pregnant again. The initial fear was inevitable. So many interrupted pregnancies had left scars not only on my body, but on my soul. I feared my body no longer knew how to carry a child to term, that somehow Mrs. Eleanor's poison still ran in my veins. I shared my anxieties with Leonard one night after putting Rose to sleep. "What if I lose this baby too?" I murmured, my hands protectively over my still flat belly. "What if my body forgot how—" Leonard held my face between his rough worker's hands, looking at me intensely. "You brought Rose into the world," he said firmly. "You are stronger than any poison, Constance, stronger than any curse. This baby will be born and will be as strong and beautiful as our daughter." And so it was. In December of that year, Joseph was born, our first son, healthy and robust like his father. After him came Mary in 1962, Anthony in 1964, the twins John and James in 1966, and finally Faith in 1968. Our youngest, born when I was already 32, an age considered advanced for motherhood at that time. 7 children, 7 lives that flourished away from the poisonous shadows of the past. Each birth was a victory, proof that we had broken the curse. As our family grew, we also prospered financially. Leonard was promoted at the factory, becoming a foreman. In 1965, we managed to buy our own home, still small, but truly ours, with a yard where the children could play and I could cultivate my plants. Never herbs, only flowers and vegetables. Life wasn't perfect, of course. We had our difficulties, our fights, our moments of despair when the money didn't last until the end of the month or when one of the children got sick. But they were normal difficulties, faced with love and unity, without the sinister shadow of manipulation or deliberate malice. Sometimes, especially on stormy nights, when thunder made the children run to our bed seeking protection, I caught myself thinking about Mrs. Eleanor. Was she alone in her big empty house, regretting the harm she had caused? Was she looking at the herb garden, now probably abandoned, remembering the 5 grandchildren she murdered before they could even breathe? We never spoke of her in front of the children. For them, their paternal grandmother was just a vague figure, someone who lived too far away to be part of their lives. Rose, curious as always, sometimes asked why we never visited Father's mother as we visited my parents in Savannah on the rare occasions when we could make the trip. Some people are like certain plants in the garden, I would explain, using metaphors that a child could understand. Beautiful from afar, but with thorns that hurt when we get too close. It was a simplistic explanation, but how do you explain to an innocent child that her grandmother had deliberately murdered her older siblings? How do you make her understand the kind of evil that goes beyond comprehension, even for many adults? In 1970, I received a letter from a former neighbor in Georgia. Mrs. Eleanor was ill, the letter said. Advanced stage cancer. The doctors gave her only a few months to live. She was alone, with no one to take care of her, slowly wasting away in the big house that had once been the setting for my worst nightmares. I showed the letter to Leonard, not knowing what to expect. He read it in silence, his face impassive. After a long moment, he carefully folded the paper and returned it to me. "She made her choice," he said simply. "Now she's reaping what she sowed." There was hardness in his voice, but also pain. The pain of a son who had been betrayed in the worst possible way by his own mother. For weeks, I watched Leonard struggle with his conflicting feelings. I saw how he hugged our children more tightly, how sometimes he would stop in the middle of a game, his eyes lost in distant thoughts. One night, after the children were already in bed, he sat down beside me on the small porch of our house. "Do you think we should go?" he asked, without needing to specify where. I took a deep breath, searching in my heart for the right answer. For years I had carried the weight of hatred for Mrs. Eleanor. It was a heavy burden that sometimes threatened to poison my own happiness like a distant echo of the tea she forced me to drink. "I don't know if we should," I replied honestly, "but I know that if we don't, we might regret it for the rest of our lives." He nodded, understanding what I hadn't explicitly said, that it wasn't for her that we would go, but for ourselves. To close a chapter, to finally free our hearts from the last remnant of poison that still persisted: resentment. We arranged the trip for the following month. My parents came from Savannah to stay with the younger children, and we took only Rose with us. She was already 13, and somehow we felt she needed to be part of this closure, even without fully understanding its meaning. The journey back to the small Georgia town was like returning in time. The same green mountains, the same clean mountain air, the same colonial houses lined up on cobblestone streets. But I was no longer the same Constance who had fled from there 13 years before. I was returning as an accomplished woman, mother of 7 healthy children, a beloved wife, mistress of my own destiny. When we arrived at Mrs. Eleanor's old house, my heart raced. There it was, the blue house with white windows that had been my prison for 5 long years. It seemed smaller now, more faded, as if the absence of life inside it had sucked away its colors. A neighbor received us, explaining that she had been taking care of Mrs. Eleanor in recent months. She led us to the room where the old lady was confined, the same room where years before I had found the book of herbs and the macabre mementos of my lost babies. And there she was, Mrs. Eleanor, or what was left of her. Lying in the large oak bed, she seemed a shadow of the imposing woman I had known. Cancer had devoured her flesh, leaving only skin and bones. Her blue eyes, once so penetrating, were now sunken in deep orbits, clouded by the morphine she took to endure the pain. Upon seeing us, something shone in those eyes. Recognition, surprise, perhaps even a flicker of remorse. "My son," she whispered, her voice so weak it could barely be heard. "You came?" Leonard approached the bed, his face tense with contradictory emotions. For a moment, I thought he might explode in accusations, release all the anger pent up for over a decade. But when he spoke, his voice was calm, controlled. "We came to say goodbye," he said simply. Mrs. Eleanor shifted her gaze from him to me, and then to Rose, who remained slightly behind us, curious and apprehensive. "Is this—" she began, but her voice failed. "Our daughter," I completed. "The first one who managed to survive your poison." There was no anger in my words, just the statement of a fact. I saw tears form in her eyes, running down the hollow cheeks from disease and time. "She is beautiful," Mrs. Eleanor murmured. "She has your eyes, and we have 6 more at home," I added. "All healthy, all loved." A sob escaped from the old lady's dried lips. She extended a hand in my direction, trembling not only from the disease, but from the weight of the confessions that were to come. "Forgiveness," she whispered. "Can I ask your forgiveness, Constance?" I looked at that hand extended in my direction, the knotted and trembling fingers that had once prepared with such meticulousness the tea that killed 5 of my children. How could I touch that hand? How could I offer forgiveness for something so monstrous? But then I felt Rose's presence beside me, that girl who represented our victory over evil, over poison, over the curse that Mrs. Eleanor tried to perpetuate. And I understood that forgiveness wasn't for her. It was for me, for Leonard, for our children, who needed to grow up free from the weight of hatred and resentment. I sat on the edge of the bed, and after a moment of hesitation, held that hand in mine. "Why?" I asked simply. It wasn't an accusation, but a genuine question. I needed to understand, not to justify the unjustifiable, but to finally close that chapter of my life. Mrs. Eleanor closed her eyes as if gathering strength for the confession she was about to make. When she opened them again, there was a lucidity in them that seemed to have pierced the fog of morphine. "My mother did the same to me," she began, her voice firmer now. "With all the daughters-in-law who came before you. It's a tradition, a curse that passes from mother to daughter in our family." I felt a chill run down my spine, a tradition to kill one's own grandchildren. She nodded weakly. "My mother called it the price of love. She said that a son should never completely belong to his wife, that the bond with the mother is sacred, inviolable." I heard Leonard let out a strangled sound, something between a sob and an exclamation of anger. He moved away, going to the window, unable to look at his mother as she bared the horrible truth. "When I was young," Mrs. Eleanor continued, "I tried to fight against it. I thought my mother was cruel, inhuman. I promised myself that I would be different, that when my son married, I would accept his wife as a daughter." She stopped, overtaken by a dry and painful cough. I offered her water from the glass that was on the nightstand. She drank with difficulty and continued. "But then you arrived, so young, so beautiful. I saw how Leonard looked at you, as if you were the sun and he a sunflower, always turning in your direction. And something awakened inside me, something dark, something I didn't know existed." "Jealousy," I murmured, finally understanding. "More than that," she corrected. "Possession. Fear of losing the only person I had left in the world. Fear of being alone." A tear ran down my face, not for her, but for the young Constance that I was, so innocent, so unprotected in the face of such calculated evil. "When you got pregnant for the first time," she continued, "something awakened in me. My mother's words, which I had buried so deep, resurfaced. 'A grandchild steals the son from his mother,' she used to say. 'A child seals the marriage, draws the man away from his true home.' So you decided that my children would not be born," I completed, my voice low but firm. She nodded, unable to deny the truth in the face of imminent death. "The first wasn't planned," she admitted. "I just prepared the tea, as my mother taught me, without really believing it would work. But when you lost the baby, I saw the power I had in my hands, and I continued. 5 times, I added. You murdered 5 of my children. Mrs. Eleanor closed her eyes as if my words had physically hit her. Yes, she finally admitted. 5 lives that never had a chance to flourish. 5 grandchildren I'll never know. I looked at Rose, who watched the scene with a confused expression, still too young to fully comprehend the horror of that confession. I silently thanked for having brought her. She was living proof that evil can be defeated, that the cycle of abuse can be broken. When you ran away, Mrs. Eleanor continued, I immediately knew what had happened, that you had discovered the truth. The anger I felt, the hatred. For months, I spread lies about you in town, trying to destroy your reputation, convince Leonard to abandon you. I know, I replied. The news reached us in New York. But then, the years passed. The house became empty, too silent, and I understood what I had done, not just to you, but to myself. Her voice failed, and for a moment, I thought she wouldn't be able to continue. But after a few moments, she went on, each word a visible effort. The curse worked exactly as my mother had promised. My son never returned to me. I got what I wanted. He never completely belonged to you, but he also never belonged to me again. I lost him forever. I looked at Leonard, still with his back to us, his shoulders shaking in silent crying. My heart ached for him, for the boy he once was, for the man he became, despite everything, for the dedicated father who daily compensated for the absence of healthy maternal love with an overflowing love for his own children. As the years went by, Mrs. Eleanor continued, her voice now just a whisper, I understood the horror of what I had done. I began to see their faces, the babies, in my dreams. I began to imagine what they would be like, what talents they would have, what it would be like to hear them calling me grandmother. She extended her trembling hand towards the bedside table. She pointed to the drawer. I opened it hesitantly, not knowing what I would find. Inside was a small wooden box, the same one I had discovered years before, containing the macabre mementos of my lost babies. I kept them, she murmured, not out of cruelty, but as penance, to never forget what I did. With trembling hands, I opened the box. There were the 5 small ribbons I had seen years before, but now, beside them, there was something else. 5 small angels carved in wood, each with a date engraved on the base, the dates of my miscarriages. I had one made for each, she explained. It was the most I could do for them. A memorial, a way of acknowledging that they existed, even if briefly. I closed the box, unable to look any longer at those tangible symbols of my pain. I turned my attention back to her, this woman who had caused so much suffering, and who now, on her deathbed, was seeking a forgiveness she perhaps didn't deserve. What you did, I said slowly, measuring each word, is unforgivable in the eyes of any person. 5 lives, 5 souls that never had a chance to breathe the air of this world. She nodded, tears now flowing freely. But carrying this hatred, I continued, this resentment would only poison my own life, my own family. The poison you gave me for so long would continue to act in another way. I paused, searching for the right words, not for her, but for myself, for my children, for the future we still had ahead. I can't say that I forgive what you did. Perhaps that's asking too much of any human being. But I can say that I won't allow hatred for you to define the rest of my life. I extended my hand and touched hers again. A gesture not of absolution, but of liberation. My liberation. The curse ends here, I declared firmly. It won't pass to my children, nor to their children. The cycle of poison, of possession, of toxic love that imprisons instead of liberating. All of this ends with us. Mrs. Eleanor squeezed my hand with what little strength she had left. You are stronger than I ever was, she whispered. Stronger than my mother, than any woman in our lineage. At that moment, Leonard finally turned to us. His face was marked by crying, but there was also a determination in him that reminded me of the young man I had fallen in love with so many years before. "I cannot forgive you, Mother," he said, his voice choked but firm. "Not today, not ever. What you did took from me not only 5 children, but also the mother I thought I had." He approached the bed, looking directly into the eyes of the woman who had given him life and who had almost destroyed his. "But I'm here to say goodbye, to close this chapter and move on, free from your shadow." Mrs. Eleanor nodded, accepting his words with a dignity she hadn't shown in life. "It's fair," she murmured, "more than I deserve." We stayed there for a few more hours. There were no great reconciliations, no miraculous forgiveness, just the silent acknowledgement that some wounds are too deep to completely heal, but that we can learn to live with them, to transform them into strength instead of weakness. When the sun began to set, we said our goodbyes. Mrs. Eleanor took Rose's hand one last time, looking in wonder at the young and innocent face that represented everything she had tried to destroy. "You are the miracle," she whispered to my daughter, "the miracle that survived the poison." Rose, without fully understanding the meaning of those words, just smiled politely, shaking the hand of the grandmother she had never really known. On our way out, the neighbor who looked after Mrs. Eleanor informed us that the doctors gave her no more than a few days to live. We nodded in silence, knowing we would not return for the funeral. Our farewell was done. We left that house for the last time, no longer as fugitives, but as survivors. As I crossed the gate, I looked at the herb garden, now abandoned and covered with weeds. The poisonous plants that had once grown there under Mrs. Eleanor's care had died, giving way to wildflowers that grew freely, without care or control. It was a perfect metaphor for what we had achieved, the transformation of poisoned soil into fertile ground for a new life. We returned to New York the next day, back to our other children, to our life built with so much effort, away from the shadows of the past. We never told them the full details of that visit, just that we had said goodbye to their grandmother, who was very ill. A month later, we received news of Mrs. Eleanor's passing. Leonard received the letter with an impassive expression, read it in silence, and then burned it in the wood stove, as if symbolically closing that chapter of our lives. The years that followed were ones of prosperity and joy. We saw our children grow strong and healthy, each following their own path, building their own families. Rose, our firstborn, became a teacher, dedicating her life to teaching children, perhaps an unconscious way of honoring the siblings she never knew. When our children began to marry, I carefully observed my behavior with my daughters-in-law and sons-in-law. I was determined to be the opposite of Mrs. Eleanor, to welcome, to support, to love without possession, without conditions, without poison. It wasn't always easy. There were times when I felt jealousy, when I wished to have my children closer, more present. Times when a word or gesture from a daughter-in-law irritated me more than it should. But in those moments, I remembered the box with the 5 angels, the 5 lives lost because of a possessive and sick love, and I took a deep breath, always choosing the path of true love, the one that liberates instead of imprisoning. In 1998, Leonard passed away after a massive heart attack. He departed as he had lived in recent years, in peace, surrounded by children and grandchildren who adored him, recognized as the loving patriarch of a large and united family. He died without ever having really forgiven his mother, but having found a way to live beyond the pain she had caused him. At his funeral, looking at the coffin surrounded by our 7 children, dozens of grandchildren, and even some newly arrived great-grandchildren, I felt a deep gratitude. Despite everything, we had won. The poison had not consumed us. The curse had been broken. Today, at 89, I live in a small but welcoming house on the outskirts of New York. The walls are covered with photographs, a visual testimony of the family we built, of the life we conquered despite all adversities. They are smiling faces, bright eyes, sincere hugs, no trace of possession, of control, of love that imprisons. Sometimes, when I'm alone, I think of the 5 who didn't survive. I imagine what they would be like, what lives they would have built, what talents they would have developed. The pain never completely disappears. It just transforms, integrates into the tapestry of life in a way that allows us to move forward. And if there is a lesson I try to pass on to my grandchildren and great-grandchildren, to the new generations who never knew the horror of what we lived through, it is this: true love never poisons, never imprisons. True love liberates. In all families there are secrets, there are pains, there are cycles of behavior that repeat generation after generation, but there is also always the possibility of rupture, of transformation, of healing. This is the true inheritance I leave for my descendants. Not material goods, not land or fortunes, but the living proof that even the most lethal poison can be defeated by the strength of genuine love. And when I look at my daughters-in-law and sons-in-law taking such loving care of my grandchildren, at my grandchildren raising my great-grandchildren with so much love, I know that the curse really ended, that what flourishes now is only life, pure, free, without poison. Mrs. Eleanor died as she lived, alone, having lost everything in trying to possess her son just for herself. I will live as I chose to live, surrounded by love, having conquered everything by allowing my children to be free, to build their own lives, their own loves. And when my time comes, I will depart in peace, knowing that what I leave behind is not a legacy of possession and poison, but of liberation and true love. Today, sitting on the porch of my small house, I observe the mountains in the distance as the afternoon sun paints the sky orange and pink. I have time to reflect on the long journey that was my life, the pains, the joys, the battles won, and mainly the lessons learned. You who hear me now perhaps wonder why I decided to share this painful story after so many years. Why stir up old wounds when I could simply leave them buried in the past? The answer is simple: because some stories need to be told, not out of vengeance or resentment, but as a beacon for those who may be facing their own storms of abuse and manipulation. When I look back at the 17-year-old Constance who entered that house in Georgia, full of dreams and hopes, I feel an immense tenderness. I wish I could go back in time and embrace her, warn her about what was to come. But I also know that it was precisely that journey that transformed me into the woman I am today, strong, resilient, able to recognize the difference between true love and its poisonous imitations. In 1973, 5 years after the birth of Faith, our youngest, I made a decision that would change my life again. I went back to school. Leonard supported me fully, taking on more responsibilities with the children so I could attend night classes. At 37, I completed elementary school. 2 years later, high school. "You don't need to do this, Constance," some neighbors commented, perplexed by my determination. "Your children are already on their way. Your husband earns well." But I knew I needed to. It wasn't just for the diploma or for better job opportunities. It was for myself, for the girl who had dreamed of a life that was interrupted by an arranged marriage and years of silent abuse. It was for all the women who, like me, had been silenced, controlled, poisoned literally or metaphorically by those who said they loved them. In 1977, I started working as an assistant in a small neighborhood library. The salary was modest, but the joy of being surrounded by books, of being able to read stories of women from all times and places, was an incalculable treasure. It was there, among dusty shelves and yellowed pages, that I began to understand that my story wasn't unique, that through the centuries, women had faced their own poisons, their own Mrs. Eleanors, and had survived to tell their stories. "You have a special way with children," the head librarian once commented, observing how I enchanted the little ones at story time. "You should consider working with them more directly." Her words planted a seed that would germinate years later. In 1980, at 44, I entered college to study education. I, Constance, the country girl who had barely completed elementary school when she got married, was now a university student. Leonard was proud. Our children, then teenagers and young adults, were too. Rose, already graduated in teaching, said I had been her inspiration to become a teacher. "You taught us the value of education long before you entered a classroom, Mom," she told me once. "You taught us when you decided that we deserved a better life than the one they tried to impose on you." Graduating at 48 was one of the greatest joys of my life. Seeing my 7 children in the audience applauding as I received my diploma was a moment of triumph I will never forget. It wasn't just a personal achievement. It was the definitive proof that the cycle had been broken, that the poison had not prevailed. In the 20 years that followed, I worked as a teacher at a primary school in the neighborhood. It wasn't just a profession, it was a mission. Each child who passed through my classroom received not only knowledge, but also lessons about true love, about respect, about how to recognize toxic relationships from an early age. "Teach your constants," parents would say at meetings. "Our children come home talking about how love that imprisons is not real love." Where do these ideas come from? I would smile without ever fully revealing my story, but planting small seeds of awareness that might someday prevent other young women from going through what I went through. In 1998, when Leonard passed away, I thought a part of me would die with him. After all, we had built our fortress against the world together. We had survived together the worst kind of betrayal. But I discovered that true love leaves deep roots that continue to nourish even after physical departure. It was after his death that I began to speak more openly about our story. Not to everyone, of course. Some pains are too intimate to be shared casually. But to my daughters-in-law, to my granddaughters who were beginning to date and build their own relationships, I wanted them to understand the subtle signs of control, of manipulation, of love that imprisons instead of liberating. "Grandma, how did you know that Grandpa was the right man?" my granddaughter Julia once asked me, then 16 and experiencing the emotions of first love. I reflected for a moment before answering. "It wasn't when we met, nor even when we married," I finally said. "It was when, faced with the greatest pain we ever faced, he chose to stand by my side, to fight with me instead of against me. True love doesn't reveal itself in moments of joy, my dear. It's in the storms that we discover who really walks with us." She looked at me intrigued, too young to understand completely, but keeping my words for the future, when life would inevitably present her with her own storms. In 2005, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. The irony didn't escape me. The same disease that had taken Mrs. Eleanor now visited me. For a brief moment, I questioned if it was some kind of cosmic justice, some final reckoning with the past. But soon I dismissed these thoughts. My life wasn't a continuation of hers. My story wouldn't follow the same dark script. When I shared the diagnosis with my family, I was flooded with a love so intense, so genuine, that no poison could ever erase. My children took turns accompanying me to chemotherapy sessions. My grandchildren prepared drawings and cards to decorate the room during my recovery from surgery. My daughters-in-law and sons-in-law organized a schedule so I would never be alone, so there would always be someone to hold my hand in the most difficult moments. "You won't face this alone, Grandma," said my grandson Peter, then only 10 years old. "The whole family is here." And they were indeed, not out of obligation or fear, not out of manipulation or control, but out of love. The kind of love that Leonard and I had cultivated over decades, the kind of love that liberates instead of imprisoning. I survived cancer, just as I had survived Mrs. Eleanor's poison. I emerged from the experience even stronger, even more determined to live fully each day I had left. In 2010, at 74, I fulfilled an old dream. I wrote a book. Not exactly my story. I still wasn't ready to publicly expose such deep wounds, but a book of stories for children. Stories about courage, about perseverance, about identifying and escaping toxic situations. Grandma Constance's stories sold only a few hundred copies, mainly in the neighborhood and surrounding areas. I never became rich or famous with it, But when I received letters from mothers saying that my stories had helped their daughters understand complex concepts about healthy relationships, I felt a richness that no money could buy. One of these letters in particular deeply marked me. It was from a young mother who had fled an abusive relationship with her young son. "Your book was the first gift I gave my son after we left his father," she wrote. "I read it to him every night, especially the story, The Blue Cup. He is still too young to fully understand, but one day, when he's older, I'll know how to explain why we left, why I chose freedom instead of the golden prison his father offered us. Your book gave me the words I couldn't find." The Blue Cup was indeed the most personal story in the book. A tale about a girl who discovers that her grandmother's beautiful blue cup with gold flowers contains not the healing tea she promises, but a poison that slowly puts to sleep whoever drinks it, making them dependent on who serves the tea. At the end of the story, the girl breaks the cup and plants flowers in the garden, using the porcelain shards to decorate the pots, transforming an instrument of control into something beautiful and liberating. Knowing that my pain transformed into art had helped another woman escape her own cycle of abuse was one of the greatest rewards of my life. In recent years, I have divided my time between my small house, which I insist on maintaining despite my children's invitations to live with them, and frequent visits to my family spread across various cities. At 89, my steps are no longer so firm, my vision is no longer so clear, but my mind remains alert. My heart remains open. When my teenage great-granddaughters visit me, they often ask me about how it was in your time, Grandma. I smile at the idea that my time has passed, as if it were a distant country they could never visit. And then I tell stories, not just the difficult ones, but also the beautiful ones. I talk about how I met Leonard, about our first years in New York, about the birth of each child, about the small daily victories that added together constitute a well-lived life. But I always subtly intertwine in these stories the most important teachings: how to recognize true love, how to perceive when someone is trying to control you, how to value your freedom above material gifts or false promises of security. Remember, my dears, I always say at the end, true love is like the sun. It illuminates, warms, makes grow, but never imprisons, never intentionally hurts, never requires you to diminish so that it can shine. I see in their young eyes the same hope that once shone in mine, but I also see something I didn't have, an early awareness, a deeper understanding of what it means to be a woman who owns herself, her body, her destiny. And this is perhaps my greatest legacy. Not the 7 children I raised, not the 32 grandchildren who call me Grandma, not the 27 great-grandchildren who fill my house with laughter and running around. My true legacy is the breaking of the cycle, the transformation of poison into medicine, the alchemy that transforms pain into wisdom. Mrs. Eleanor died alone, embittered, consumed by the same poison she tried to administer to others. I will live my last days surrounded by genuine love, by bonds that do not imprison, but sustain. When I look at the starry sky on clear winter nights, I sometimes imagine my 5 little ones who never came to be born. They would be adults now, perhaps with their own children and grandchildren. The pain of that loss never completely disappeared. It just transformed, integrated into the complex tapestry of my existence. But there is no more anger, no more desire for vengeance. Just the quiet certainty that in the end, love won. Not Mrs. Eleanor's possessive, controlling, poisonous love, but the patient, resilient, liberating love that Leonard and I built day by day, child after child, decade after decade. And if there is a final message I would like to leave to all who hear my story, it is this. Poison doesn't always come in blue cups with gold flowers. Sometimes it comes in sweet words that diminish your self-confidence, in seemingly protective gestures that limit your freedom, in family traditions that perpetuate cycles of abuse. Learn to recognize poison in all its forms. Learn to say no, to break the cup if necessary, to flee if needed. Your life is too precious to be slowly consumed by someone who says they love you, but who really only wants to possess you. True love never poisons, never imprisons. True love liberates. This is the lesson of a lifetime. This is the heritage I leave for you. And as the sun sets on the horizon, coloring the sky with shades of orange and pink, I feel a deep peace. The journey was long, often painful, but infinitely rewarding. The poison did not win. The curse was broken. And what flourishes now in this garden, watered with tears, but cultivated with determination, is only life, full, free, authentic. I, Constance, a country girl who became a woman, wife, mother, teacher, writer, survivor, can finally say, it was worth it. Every struggle, every tear, every new beginning, it was worth it. And when my time comes to leave, it will be with the certainty that I leave behind not a trail of poison and control, but a path illuminated by true love, the one that doesn't need blue cups or bitter herbs to exist. Just open hearts and hands that know when to hold and when to let go. This is my story. This is my victory. This is my legacy. My dears, if this story touched your heart in some way, please leave your like and subscribe to the channel to continue following stories like this one. Share with someone who might need to hear these words today, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your support means a lot to me and gives me strength to continue sharing these life lessons.